On today's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we are back after a lengthy hiatus, but nonetheless, we're here to give you our recap of the last several weeks dating back to the first Giants game all the way through the Browns game. A lot has happened, so we'll have a lot to talk about, and we'll get everybody ready for the finale against the Cowboys. So without further ado, let's get this show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Going Commando podcast. My name is Tom, here with my co-hosts Clark and Chris, and it's been a bit of a hiatus for us. And now, as my co-hosts know, I recently graduated from Arizona State University. I have a degree in history now.
Congratulations.
Thank you very
Clap
much.
it
It's
up.
a little bit more useful than a communications degree, but only a little bit. And obviously, the week after that, me and my co-host Chris both got sick, different times, obviously, but kept us on hiatus for a little bit. But now we're back, and I'm excited to be doing this with you boys. So let's just get into it. How you feeling? We left off just after the Falcons game talking about the Giants, and boy, were those two games a doozy. I believe my co-host Clark has a lot to say about them.
Yeah, well, what a time for us to take a hiatus. If you had been following along with the Commanders season solely by listening and tuning into Going Commando every week, you'd have thought that the season would be going fine just about now. But lo and behold, in this stretch, we play the New York Giants twice, 49ers and Browns. We ended up eliminating ourselves from playoff contention. So as you mentioned, Tom, we're kind of going to go through all the games that we missed, and we'll start with both Giants games. Of course, we played them in East Rutherford, New Jersey, right after we recorded our last podcast, and that was the first game, the tie. And then, of course, the bye into the next week, which was the Sunday night loss to New York. So obviously, there's a lot to take from both of those games. There are two very closely contested games. Kind of playing from behind in both of them. It seemed as if the second game was going to end similarly to the first, with us tying the Giants, having a chance to come down the field and tie. But, of course, some untimely penalties and that no call on Curtis Samuel getting guarded in the corner of the end zone cost us the game there. So a little bit of failure in terms of the players and the coaching staff, as well as some blame that could be, out of our control. So just what are your guys' thoughts from those two games?
I think my biggest takeaway from these past two Giants games actually, is Kayvon Thibodeau looks like a guy who just is going to be a wrecker in this league for years to come. He had a sack in the last game, and I believe he had two in the game before that, maybe just one. But this guy really gave us nightmares. I mean, honestly, he was making our left tackle kind of look foolish at times, lining up on the right side, moving all around the field. Really impressive. I think Wink Martindale has a solid defense back there. Two honestly kind of tight games. We held them to under 21 points, which is usually what most people would tell you is where you want to hold teams to. And we just couldn't get it done. I mean, the first time the tie gave us a lot of confidence, I feel like. They go into that bye week and play the Eagles, and they look good, but eh. And they come back and they beat us. So, I think those Giants games were big momentum setters. I think it really is what helped the Giants reach the point they are at now, where they're the sixth seed in playoffs and they look like they're gonna, continue to stay there. Um, and I think that those Giants games, man, the defense really just made us look foolish at times, despite Heineke not having interceptions, which is usually my biggest gripe with Heineke.
Well, he didn't have interceptions. He had some very untimely fumbles, especially in that second game against the Giants. We were down by only a few points, and we're at the goal line. Heineke has that fumble. It might have been Thibodeau on that one. Again, I know that earlier in the game, he had the strip sack and recovery for a touchdown that ultimately was the difference in that game. Not to mention that whole missed extra point or 2 point conversion snafu that ended up set ourselves at 12 points for that game. So there's a lot of things you can look back on that didn't necessarily go right, but again, they were games that we were in the whole way through. And it's games like that, especially against a divisional opponent, an opponent that on paper you probably have more talent across the board, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And it was just really disappointing to see the outcome of both of those games.
Yeah, I think we kind of something just a common theme that we saw in both of these games and continuing on kind of in the back just end stretch of this season is just issues with O-line and protecting the quarterback. I think that's really been an issue for us all season long, but for some reason these last several games it's just been truly magnified and been a huge roadblock for us when we're trying to, get stuff done on the offense. And it doesn't, so all of our problems solely don't come back to that offensive line. Obviously not. But, Tom, you were mentioning it, Thibodeau and company were able to consistently, get through the offensive line, create a lot of pressure for Heineke to be dealing with. And it resulted in some really costly sacks, some really costly fumbles. Obviously, when anyone fumbles, there's fault on the ball carrier. Heineke isn't without blame for those as well, but I place a lot of that on Charles Leno and some of those other guys along that line who just have been not playing up to the standard with which this team needs to perform, at a level it's capable of. So, just overall, upset with the performance of that O line over those two Giants games. I think we definitely could have won at least the first one with a little bit better play from them. Also, we've been just we've been dealing with some changes, injuries in the backfield as well. I remember this was a game where we had to have Christian Holmes. That first game we had to have Christian Holmes start, and he did not look that great. I don't know if he's ready yet, really, for a more of a full-time role. Um, you know, Mixing guys in and out, Rashad Wildgoose, Danny Johnson. When guys like St. Juice are banged up, and you really only have Fuller in there, who's looked spotty at times in the back end of this season, it can be really tough for us to remain competitive as well. So I think injuries, one, and not having all our full lineup in place hurt us, and then yeah, just poor play from a couple of different position groups that just kind of sealed our fate here.
Yeah, and one more thing I would like to note. I feel like this really is known by Giants fans, and as a Commanders fan, I'm having a bit more respect for it, especially considering our situation. But Brian Dable just looks like such a good head coaching hire for the Giants. I mean, you bring in an offensive coordinator for the Bills, and you think, well, what is he without Josh Allen? What is he without Stephon Diggs? And let me tell you, the guy's legit. I mean, those offensive game schemes, while Danny Dimes might not be throwing as many touchdowns, and maybe they're moving more towards a run-heavy offense, which when you have Saquon, you kind of have to do. Um, you know, they're winning games and they're putting this Giants team in a playoff position that I don't think any of us would have predicted at the beginning of the year. And seeing how it is for us, I mean, we know how much of a difference coaching makes. Ron Rivera certainly doesn't seem to know how big of a difference coaching makes, but Brian Dable is really just changing the culture. It seems like it's a brand new team, a brand new identity, a brand new locker room. And that's with a lot of guys coming back. And that's even with, Kenny Galladay, who signed a 4-year, $72 million contract, having one of the worst seasons of his life. I mean, I looked at a stat that said he needs 67 catches to get his $750,000 bonus, and that was almost thought to be guaranteed at the beginning of the season with the way this Giants offense looks. So just really good coaching from the Giants. I wanted to make sure that we make Brian Dable known to these Commanders fans because we're going to be having a lot of troubles with this guy in the future. So remember the name.
Yeah, I think he's definitely coach of the year. You know, giving flowers to a division opponent is never fun, but he seems like he's really got this group playing hard. He's revitalized the career of Daniel Jones, as you mentioned. My take on him is that he's kind of turned Daniel Jones into like a more athletic Alex Smith. You know, in the games where in the last two games against us, I mean, he was just throwing some very accurate short passes. There was nothing crazy. They weren't, airing it out. They were running the ball well. But Daniel Jones, I want to say, if you combine his completion percentage, it'd be very high for those two games. It was just a lot of quick, short passes, and he also gives you that element, with his legs. He's one of the best running quarterbacks in the entire NFL. So, uh, absolutely, Daboll is a guy that we're gonna have to see year in and year out, probably for a while.
I totally agree with the well, first off, I totally agree with Dable. I think he's a great head coach, and you guys already touched on that for sure. I totally agree. I think Danny Dimes showed this season as well, that, yes, he's maybe not he's definitely not in that elite echelon of quarterbacks, but he's a guy that you can kind of trust to come in and win some games for you and be a good game manager and then a leader for your team. I agree. I thought he looked pretty good in both games against us. It was disappointing that we weren't able to kind of take advantage of some of his weaknesses or so perceived weaknesses that we've been kind of harping on and kind of smacking our lips almost, thinking to the beginning of the season, talking about facing the Giants before we really saw them kind of take steam here. Um, Really, just back to these two games, it was offensively, we just couldn't convert on third down, barely at all. And I think that has been a theme over the whole season as well. Just poor third down conversions. We're not being able to continue drives and keep the chains moving. I think that was a huge issue for us. I mean, I know there's been some games this year where we've been able to maintain, time of possession over double what the other team has. And so it's just really frustrating to see this is inconsistency week to week. Some weeks it's like we're dominating the entire field with our offense and you can't get us off. And then, other weeks we can't even stay on for more than a drive at a time or more than a series at a time, rather. So that I've been disappointed with that. And then overall, just the play calling, I don't think is good enough. It's just not good enough offensively or defensively. We're not adjusting fast enough. I mean, they ran all over us these two Giants games. Saquon, give him credit. He's an elite running back and he's really good. But we pride ourselves on the run stop as part of our bread and butter of our defense and what our strengths are. And they ran all over us. Jack Del Rio didn't make the adjustments that you need to make in a timely manner to compensate for that. And it was when he did, it was too little, too late. Rivera, I don't think he's doing much of the play calling himself, quite honestly. But there was there's plenty of situations, particularly in those kind of short yardage situations as well. I just don't think we're making the right calls. So Scott Turner, a little disappointed with him there over these last several games as well.
No, and you're absolutely right. And moving forward into this 49ers game, I think you see that same issue with them just running all over us. Now, obviously, this game, I have a lot of notes on it. My first note is going to be I have no clue why you sub out Taylor Heineke in that game and put in Carson Wentz. I know it's a rough game. I know we're down, but why are you playing Carson Wentz? Even assuming that you're trying to win that game and stay in playoff contention, XYZ. You're running the clock on this guy when we might owe the frickin' Colts a second round pick. I mean, seeing the team as it's built now, we need every pick that we can get in these upcoming drafts, and playing Carson Wentz is the worst frickin' idea possible. Now, that being said, I think a lot of that blame for the 49ers loss, obviously a 37-20 loss, goes to Brian Robinson, sadly, but it really more goes to Scott Turner. I mean, you're giving Brian Robinson 22 carries. He's producing at a 2.6 yard average. For those of you who don't want to do the math, that's 58 yards for the entire game. You know, stop handing the ball off to this guy if it's not going anywhere. And I think that That was one of the big things for me, was that we'd run ourselves into third downs, and then we wouldn't be able to get the pass off, or we wouldn't have the guy catch it, or we didn't pick up the first down, and that would just be it for us. We'd go out and punt the ball. And this 49ers game was certainly one that we could have won. I feel like we absolutely could have won it. Brock Purdy is nothing too special. If you honestly look at his line, it doesn't look much better than either quarterback from the Commanders in that game. And speaking on that run defense you're talking about, Ray McLeod, a guy who you nobody needs to go. The fact that I even said his name on this podcast disgusts me. He has one carry for 71 yards and a touchdown. And I remember that play. It's an end around, and you start to think, well, how does he beat us like that? And it's because we aren't making the correct defensive adjustments at all, especially on a team where their running game with a guy like, I don't know, Christian McCaffrey, one of the best running backs in the league, is one of their biggest strong suits. Um, and you're gonna say George Kittle had a good game. He did have a good game, but that's George Kittle. I expect him to have a good game. Why is Ray McLeod running for 71 yards on us? It's just an absolute farce of a loss to me. I hate that this is a game that we don't have a W in the win column for. And absolutely head scratching moves across the board. I don't know what you boys had to think about it, but that's my early opinion.
I think that you're being a little bit harsh because, quite frankly, this was a game that in the preseason, I didn't think we were going to win. The 49ers are one of the most talented teams in the NFL. They have probably the best defense in the NFL right now. And it's a really tough spot to go into their stadium and try to come out with a win. Now, it did look like at points that we were in this game. And Taylor Heineke, he did turn the ball over a couple of times in some inopportune moments, which ultimately did kind of cost us in the end. So I do understand why they pulled him. I don't think he was playing super particularly bad, but I guess they just wanted to see another look. I understand it, but what doesn't make any sense is just, using that as an excuse to bench him the next week. That's a really tough team to go against for any quarterback in the NFL. And then as for Brock Purdy and, Ray McLeod and all that, we've seen Kyle Shanahan's offense firsthand with Washington. He's a great coach. He's a great offensive mastermind, and he knows how to get the best out of his players. You always see all of his running backs, going on and getting contracts with other teams, even though they might not be the most talented guys. When you plug them into that system, they look like beasts. You remember a guy, Alfred Morris, he was pretty good for us for a couple of years in that offense. So I just think that this was a game that was a tough matchup all across the board. And I think we played decent at times, but we couldn't have predicted the lasting impacts that pulling Taylor Heineke was going to have.
Yeah, I personally don't think that a tough tie, and two losses necessarily equals a benching for a guy that brought us back from the brink of absolute Armageddon and elimination so early in the season. We're sitting at 2-4, and we're already looking ahead to next season. Heineke comes in, all of a sudden we're back in playoff contention, and with meaningful football being played late in the season. We don't usually get that, as fans here in Washington. So I disagreed with the benching, but with regards to this game in particular, he didn't play that well, and I think and you're right. That this is overall just is a much probably better, more solid foundational team than we were. One important thing to note: I think this was the first game where you saw us having to start David Mayo opposite Jamin Davis. Bostic, who had been filling in for a lot of the season in place of Cole Holcomb, I think he was placed on IR. Or injured, maybe re-injured that pec that he's had issues with last season in this game, or perhaps even maybe he was in the Giants game previous. I know that we did see a lot of David Mayo in this game, and as much as I rip on Bostic, Mayo's even slower and even probably less athletic in coverage. So, that's not to hate on David Mayo. He has his role, but on this team, potentially, but it's not a starter. So, obviously, I think that they were going to target. That's why George Kittle has such a big game. He was, you had David Mayo covering him on majority of those, a lot of those throws, and the same goes for why the run game was so good. I'm not going to place this solely on David Mayo as well, but that's just an example of how this team is banged up. We're missing key guys. You're missing Cam Curl. You're missing St. Juice. You're missing. You're just getting Chase Young back. Maybe along the defensive side of the ball. So it's there's a lot of guys that are banged up. And I think that is a contributing factor as well. I know it's no excuse, of course, but I think that's a contributing factor for kind of the late season slide here as well.
Yes, you boys do have some points there, but I mean, just looking and remembering this game, it really was not that great of a game for us, even if you were to give all these excuses. I mean, Nick Bosa had 2 sacks, he's a star guy. I get it. He's a guy that's going to have those sacks, whether you put 3 guys on him or one. He's going to just have those numbers. But there's just a lot of offensive ineptitude and inefficiency if you just read the stats and didn't even watch the game. I mean, I watched the game and I remember how bad that offense was. I mean, I could tell you, I watching with my parents, I would just say 3 and out, and they'd go 3 and out, and that's how it would go. Uh, and this team has a lot of issues, and this was a game that we needed to win, and we had Chase Young come back, yes, but he didn't produce like we thought he would, or at least like I thought he would or hoped he would, especially given how, in shape and how big of a deal they made about making sure he got back to 100% or as close to 100% as possible. And it just didn't look like that great of a game. Now, I have a personal anger towards the 49ers because I'm not a Kyle Shanahan fan. I believe he's the reason why RG3 didn't work in DC. I think that if they had just really supported him with a better offensive line and Kyle really pushed him away from being a pocket passer, maybe we would have had a little bit of success. But he's also one of the guys that we let slip out of the building. And you really don't want to have that happen when you have these, young guys who go on to be sort of maybe superstar head coaches would be the best way to put it, but a guy that's at least well known and respected throughout the league. Now obviously Carson Wentz had a surprisingly decent game after being thrown in for Taylor Heineke, and that's kind of I think the reason why you see him play in games, play in that Browns game, and we'll get to that in a minute, but it was almost shocking to me that you would put Carson Wentz into this game after showing so much trust for Taylor and the fans kind of really getting behind him these past few weeks, and you just pull him in a game where it doesn't make sense to pull him really. Um, and fingers crossed Scott Turner gets a new job next year and that he's out on his butt like Ron Rivera, in my opinion, should be, but we'll see.
I mean, he was getting tossed around there. He was getting tossed around by that 49ers defense. Like I get it. I do. I stated that earlier. I get the benching. But that I guess can kind of take us into the next game where he was, not starting and was not named the starter in a game that we did truly need to win. Now that 49ers game, when you look at the paper, you look at where other teams were, we didn't really need to win that one. That was a game that we kind of knew we were going to lose. But this next one was a must-win game against the Cleveland Browns. Chris, you were there at the game. They unveiled
Yes.
Major Tutty, the new mascot. But I don't think really that was too relevant at all based off of, what transpired at FedEx Field that day.
No. By the time they were unveiling Major Tutty, I was not even in a state of mind to be concerned about, whether I thought that was cool or not, because the things weren't looking that great for us in the game at that point. Look, I get it. I get the logic from Rivera. Like, look, okay, you spent all this money on Wentz, you kind of put all your eggs in this basket, that this guy to come in and be a solution for you. he looks pretty good in garbage time, in the game before, throwing into soft, bullshit coverage. He looks good there. I get it. I get the reasons. He has reasons to why he did it, but Rivera is always going to be thinking about this game. I know I am as a fan about, hey, what could have been different if we just put Heineke in there? Maybe we don't throw 3 picks. Maybe we are competitive right out the gate, and you change the momentum, change the way that this game ends up flowing out. So I don't respect the decision that Rivera made, and I don't agree with it, and I just don't think he's the best coach really. I think we deserve better as an organization. But yeah, it was a fun time. Don't get me wrong. I love going to the games. Went with a good group of my friends who are also pretty diehard fans. I checked out the Sean Taylor Memorial or mannequin, however you want to call it. It was actually pretty cool in person. I think it would have been not as broadly hated upon if it wasn't hyped up as much, and if it was more so just, hey, we're just doing this out of the, just as a surprise to put in here, just as one of the many things we're doing to honor Sean Taylor. I don't think it would have been hit with such a nasty backlash, because it doesn't look that bad, especially now that they've made some of the adjustments to it to reflect his proper gear and how he actually dressed and suited up and things like that. I just don't think it can be like, okay, this is what we've this is the grand and mighty statue that we've erected for in his honor. It didn't really live up to something with that kind of weight behind it, but I overall it's just something interesting to have at FedEx. I think it's good. But yeah, I mean, great. I love being in the atmosphere. I love hanging out with other fans. Was probably about 50-50 on the split in terms of Browns fans to Commanders / Washington fans in there. I wasn't necessarily surprised about that. I mean, it was better than some games I've been at, and but not as great as some other games I've been at in terms of the ratio of fans to competitor fans. Overall, yeah, very poor, just very, very poor play out of Carson Wentz. That's the primary, takeaway. Primary takeaway there. Heineke chants were basically going on all game long, and I joined in on those. Would be lying if I say I didn't. Defense kept us in the game, for the first 2/3 of the game. Kept the defense mostly at bay, or rather, kept the other team mostly at bay, rather. But when our offense just isn't able to string pretty much anything competent together, it's just not sustainable. Keep turning the ball over. I mean, Carson Wentz 16 for 28, 143 yards, 3 picks. Grant Delpit, with 2 of those picks. So I guess kudos to Grant. But yeah, we're just not going to get it done in a game like that. I have a couple other notes here, but curious, I guess, initial thoughts for what you guys thought watching at home.
Right away, initial reaction is, is Ron Rivera trying to get fired here? What's going on? Obviously, he comes out of the gate, Wentz, and throws 2 interceptions fast. Okay, that maybe that's like, oh, whoa, like maybe this guy wasn't ready to step in here. Like this is a must-win game. We need to do something here. But no, that wasn't the attitude. They kind of just, he had that touchdown drive at the end of the first half, and we were actually winning this game and going into halftime. It felt like we had played like shit. And we didn't really deserve to be in the lead, but we were winning. And so because of that, Wentz comes out in the second half, and no adjustment, no pulling of Wentz is ever made. And then of course, after the game in the press conference, Ron Rivera, when he was asked, how the decision to put Wentz in, was weighed given the result of the Packers game, which if the Packers beat the Vikings, which they did, we would be eliminated. Rivera appeared to not know that was the case.
Yeah,
Rivera thought that we were going to have another week to still be alive in playoff contention. And that right there, that show of ineptitude, first off, if you don't know that, you don't say that in the press conference, Ron, unless you really just don't care anymore and you're trying to get out of here. And that is kind of what I think might be happening.
I could see that. That's a really interesting point you raised there, Clark. I mean, I too, I was incredulous. I was like, he's got to be joking, right? That he isn't in the loop about what was going on. And I thought he kind of took a second to think about what he was going to say before he said that, or it kind of looked like it. Maybe he was, trying to pretend like he didn't even know that because he was so focused just on the here and now and winning here and now. I mean, that's what I would like to think. But I mean, I agree with you. I think he really was just completely inept, as he's been for a lot of this season. And I need to separate it from, I don't dislike Ron Rivera. I think he's a good person and seems like a good person, and I respect what he's been through and some of the hardships he's had to deal with, and then also the fact that he's coming into probably the most difficult coaching situation in the NFL, given the history, the ownership you have to deal with, the fanship, just kind of everything involved there. But that doesn't make that's no excuse for just the poor coaching decisions and leadership and just being kind of on top of things like most other coaches seem to be in this league. So that's super interesting. Maybe he is trying to get out at this point, Clark. I hadn't thought about that yet. I certainly wouldn't be complaining.
Yes, I believe he
Well, let
still
me
has another year on that contract of his. And
Maybe two,
yeah,
I believe.
I know that he's still under contract as of now.
Yes.
And so, yeah,
Well, let me return to the game real quick because I did want to make a few comments on this game.
Sure
Now I
thing.
was watching this Commanders Browns game kind of intently, obviously, as most true diehard Commanders would be. This was a game that really was to decide our fate. I was kind of actually surprisingly excited to see Carson Wentz start the game. I thought maybe he, this show of confidence in him would bring something back that he didn't have for a while. Maybe he would, step it up and really start to show some colors that we hadn't seen of him yet. But all we really got was a ginger performance. I mean, three
Mm-hmm.
interceptions is something that I don't expect it from a blonde. I don't expect it from a brunette. I expect it from a ginger. And that first interception was almost unacceptable how hard he was staring down Terry McLaurin. And right before that, they were talking about how Denzel Ward, the Browns cornerback, would be seeing his one-time Ohio State teammate Terry McLaurin all game, basically. So that first interception, horrid, absolutely terrible. I think any one of us could have thrown a better pass and not stared down the receiver as hard as Wentz did. Once again, going back to kind of my earlier gripes, this was a game where we saw a lot of runs with Brian Robinson, and that's not to say that I don't want to see Brian Robinson getting touches, but if it's not working, go to someone else. And Clark, you made a really interesting point here. I mean, there was I believe it was a third down toss play to Jonathan Williams of all people, and this was an important, an important run for the game, and you're tossing it to Jonathan Williams. I didn't understand that. We all kind of made the comment at the time. It really kind of felt like Scott Turner is trying to see how far that nepotism rock will go up the hill. Because I'll tell you what, he's pushing that boulder as much as he can, but it's going to roll over him at some point, hopefully, and get him off my freaking team. Um,
yeah, I mean, Gibson was inactive. That's probably the only reason we saw some more Jonathan Williams carries. But let's face it, those are just not the same player, right? I mean, you're not going to have success on a sweep to the outside with Jonathan Williams on a fourth down. I don't know. Just I agree. That was tough to watch.
And my last real note here is Logan Thomas, a guy who we've really been, pooping on all season. These past two games, he's been accumulating like Westbrook here. I mean, 12 receptions over the last two games now, albeit for, about 85, 89 yards at most. This guy's really making a case to try and stay on the team. And at this point, I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I think you guys are going to agree with me even more than when I said it the first time. We have the weakest tight end room in the league. And that's no knock on the guys. That's really more of a conversation about how skilled that position is getting and how a lot of teams have really been focusing on upgrading that position. And it's really showing how weak our tight end room is when he's our top receiver and he's barely putting up, 55 yards. I believe he put up 56 this past game. And it's horrible to see that. I mean, I want to see a team that if our top receiver is getting 6 receptions, I want to see him break triple digits. I want to see a receiving touchdown from that guy. I don't want to see a game where we lose 24-10. That being said, now Deshaun Watson had one heck of a game. Amari Cooper looked like he was in a Cowboys uniform again with how efficient he was playing. 3 receptions, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, it was really just a surprisingly great game for the Browns. They ran all over us with Nick Chubb. I mean, Chris, you made a great point. The defense kept us in that game with how they were stopping them at first. And then the second half kind of just it started to fall apart slowly and then it started to fall apart quickly. Um, so this Browns game, man, I mean, talk about a deflating loss. Um, but on the upside, I think the massage parlors in DC got a pretty good patronage after the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, likely so. With Deshaun probably in a good mood, after that game, playing well like he did. Um, I agree with a lot of what you guys have just said there. I thought B-Rob ran hard, but it was clear, he probably was a little hurt and it was tough for him to kind of take the primary workload. And yeah, Jonathan Williams, I like him, but he's no substitute for, a true RB1, running mate to go alongside, B-Rob there. Amari Cooper was all over us. Our DBs were not playing well. Even our normally good DBs, in Kendall Fuller, were not playing up to snub. Um, Rivera stuck with Wentz in there even after multiple turnovers, so it's clear that there was no leash for Wentz, whereas there is for Heineke. When he starts to struggle. Um, it just disappointing there. O-line continued to be a disappointment in this game. Very poor play out of the tackle position, as well as, Wes Schweitzer. I kept seeing an insane amount of these low snaps or bad snaps from Wes Schweitzer. Now, I do like the guy, but let's keep Schweitzer at guard. Let's not rely on him to be our center, at this point, in the season. Again, David Mayo, not looking great out there. If I want to talk about a couple positives, from this game that I made note of, Daron Payne obviously have 2 sacks, totaling 11 and a half for, career high on the season. That's the most on the team. He's making a really great case for, us to re-sign him, and I hope we do, plus his own future just in general. But quite frankly, I don't think I have the confidence in this staff to be able to handle re-signing him properly and doing so. So they'll probably find a way to mess it up if they're still around. Thought Chase Young looked decent. He's not wowing any of us and making game breaking plays, but he's actually playing a little bit better than I thought, kind of coming out the gate here. And I thought Jamin looked good as well. So not too many positives really in this last game. It was a fun game to be at. I always enjoy being at games live and in person, but really prefer it when we win and when we don't kind of have our season kind of crushed right in front of us there. So, oh well. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, kind of on what we do from here and kind of what we do moving forward.
Yeah, so one thing that I want to bring up, something that I was thinking about now, obviously after a game like this, it was a game with crucial playoff implications that Wentz gets inserted into, and it falls flat. Same thing happened in Indy last year where they needed to win and get in, and he fell flat. I think it's safe to say that this was probably Carson Wentz's last opportunity at being a starting quarterback in this league. But I'll offer you guys this theory. Is this Wentz's last stop in the NFL, period? I mean, who is going to take
Good
this
question.
guy? Who is going to take this guy to be their backup? You look at him, oh yeah, the arm talent, 2017, he was really good, blah, 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 blah. I think it's safe enough to say that he is just not the same guy as he was in 2017. He'll never be the same guy as he was in 2017. And to be honest with you, like, he just doesn't seem like a guy that the teammates like. A lot of times good quality in a backup quarterback, he's a guy that the team can rally around and the team gets hyped for. And A guy that can bring you a spark in the event that your quarterback goes down or you need to make a switch. I just don't see that with Wentz. And for that reason, I would see a lot of teams hesitant to bring him in at all.
That's a great point, Clark. Not only has he shown that he's not, really capable of having that starter, quality play, on the field, he hasn't really shown that he's, capable of being a quality backup even, really so far, really this season or over the last, couple years of his career, right? I mean, it's been so up and down for this guy. I do think that he will get an opportunity, to be on a roster, again. At some point, I don't know if this is the last stop for Carson Wentz, but I certainly think it's the last stop for him as being, considered as a starter, heading into a season, right? I don't think you see that going forward. I do think that just based on, look, he led the team, he led a Super Bowl team basically to the playoffs that year, before getting injured towards the end of that season. He's had MVP votes. He's looked good in the past. He's had these flash in the pan games, right? So I don't think this is his last stop in the NFL, but I definitely don't think that he's getting another warm third, and by now really third, chance to see what he can do, because it's clear that he just isn't. He's not competent at that level.
Yeah, and you gotta remember, we're talking about a guy who was the 2 overall pick in 2017, possibly 2016. And this was a guy that had a lot of hype coming in. I mean, his injury issues were something that they talked about. He did work back from an injury in college. People were kind of worried about that. They said that he had the arm talent, though. The decision making was a little questionable, but everything else seemed really good on him. I think if you're even considering bringing Carson Wentz on, first off, you're not paying him the same amount of money that he was getting paid by the Colts or by the Commanders this year. He's getting a backup prorated contract over maybe 2 years at most, and that's if you really think you need the guy. Um, I think that this is probably his last stop where he plays. At least I hope it is, because I'm telling you what, I don't want to see another Carson Wentz football game in my lifetime. And that's a kind of sad statement considering how good he was at one point. Um, Now, obviously, moving forward, I think it's good that we're starting Sam Howell. He's a guy that I've been really excited for, and I've always kind of been tooting his horn and hoping that the team would give him a chance. Uh, Seems unlikely that he's going to get much more of a chance outside of this, especially if, a guy like, let's say, Derek Carr is on the market and the Commanders have maybe even a new owner who's looking to make a splash. Now that being said, I think that while we get rid of Carson Wentz, I think we still got to hold on to Taylor Heineke. And I know it's weird to hear me say that, but he did play well enough and he does know the system. And if Sam Howell doesn't work out, I mean, we're SOL. And I just don't know where Wentz goes from here. I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but that guy really proved that he's not made for the NFL, and that's not a problem. I'd love to see him in the XFL. I'd love to see him playing for some other team than mine, obviously. But quite honestly, Wentz could never play another snap in the NFL, and I'd be a bit happier for it, having not to see that guy fumble or mess things up or throw 3 interceptions again. So
Well,
that's my whole take on Wentz. I'm trying not to be too hard on the guy, but obviously, get him off my team. Don't pay him his money. I don't care. Just make sure I don't see him on the field next year.
well, let's not forget that this guy's still under contract with us next year. So it's not this isn't just going to be a, you know, we're just going to let him walk away and we live happily ever after. We're either going to have to cut this guy, which is probably what's going to happen at this point, because I don't see anybody trading for him. Or if we can't, for some reason make that happen, he's going to be on this roster next year. I really don't see a way that we can do that. But I mean, I don't know. My prediction, my kind of hot take is that if he's in the NFL next year, it's going to be for the Washington Commanders. And if he's not on our roster, I don't think he's going to be on any roster. But that's just my take.
Well, one last quick note here. ESPN John Keim put out kind of a worrying statement where apparently the Commanders organization doesn't want to cut Wentz. They don't want to have to look for a new QB in the offseason. Now, obviously, this was before the Browns game. Maybe after the Browns game, things changed a little bit, but it's worrying for me to hear that there wasn't really plans to get rid of this guy. I mean, I think we all kind of know that the book is out on him, and he's, at this point he's an old dog. He's not going to learn any new tricks. So why keep him on the team if he just could be a hindrance? But that's my opinion, and that's what I'm hoping changes. So
Yeah, I heard that too, Tom, and it worried me as well. It was before, this most recent game, so hopefully the mindset has changed there. Um, if Wentz still is on this team next year, it's because they cut him or and re-signed him back to a cheap deal, where they figured out a way to restructure his deal, so he is paid significantly less, and I'm talking like backup money, probably less than what Taylor Heineke is making, kind of money. Um, you know, that said, I'm curious to see what they do. I think a lot of that might actually hinge on this upcoming game with Sam Howell. If Sam Howell plays pretty well, they're probably not as chomping at the bit to go out and spend a bunch of money on a quarterback if they feel like they have a guy that could even maybe bridge them another season or two. I would love to see Heineke back in the burgundy and gold. He's one of my favorite players we've had over these last several seasons, obviously. And he always have a place, in Washington, kind of like football lore, so to speak. Um, I think that Heineke is an attractive candidate for other teams who are looking for a high end backup, or dare I say a bridge kind of quarterback, starting quarterback, right? I mean, um, I don't necessarily want to get into landing spots for the guy. I hope he's back here with us, but I do think a lot of what this staff is going to do if they're still here, I guess there's so many what ifs when it comes to this offseason, really, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that in a later episode once the season officially wraps up here. Um, but yeah, there's so many ways that this staff could go with the quarterback position. I think the only really safe bet is that Howe will be on the team next year. Really, other than that, it's totally up in the air.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of questions answered. Obviously, there's still going to be a ton after this season, but after that kind of that Monday where generally all the coaches get fired, or the few days after the last Sunday of the season, we're going to see what happens, and that'll kind of tell us if they plan on keeping this coaching staff around. But again, that could also
Right.
change with an ownership change. That
Right.
ends up happening in a few months. Maybe they do look to go for a different direction, but generally head coaches are hired kind of around this time to give them a full kind of 9 months or so before the season starts. But with that being said, going into the Cowboys game, a game that Tom and I will be in attendance with, it's a friend of ours that is a Dallas fan. He'll probably be in the majority. If I was a betting man, I would say that there's going to be a lot of Dallas
Oh
fans
yeah.
there because they are still playing for playoff seeding. They actually have a potential to, sounds crazy, but they could end up with the number one seed if the Eagles lose and the 49ers lose. I don't see that happening, but so they're going to be playing all their guys trying to win this game. And as for us, we've already said that we're playing Sam Howell, which is awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing him sling it around. But winning this game versus losing this game is also significant
yeah.
for our draft position. I believe we could get upwards of the 10th pick if we lose this game. If not, we could be sitting somewhere in the low 20s. So a lot is riding on this game in terms of the draft position. So I'm not going to be upset if we lose, but I'm looking to see some things out of Sam Howell, and maybe this coaching staff making a case for why they should return next year.
I totally agree. I mean, I think if we fully intended on tanking this game, I think there's another quarterback that we'd probably want to keep in there, for this last game. But no, obviously I don't advocate for tanking at all or anything like that. I mean, obviously, that I think that's just something we deal with, once the season is all said and done with. Because I do think this is a good opportunity for us to evaluate for Hal to show, not only this coaching staff, but potential other coaching staffs and other teams just in general, if he's been able to kind of develop at the same rate that some of these other rookie quarterbacks, from his class have had to develop at and kind of been thrown into situations. So I heard him speak to the media yesterday, after kind of getting the official word he's going to be starting. He seemed confident. He seemed ready and excited, for the opportunity. So I'm really looking forward to that, of course. Be looking forward to hearing how the game goes in person for you guys as well, of course. But other guys as well are going to get opportunities. Some guys that we really haven't seen too much of as well. Chris Paul, is a guy that Rivera actually mentioned is going to get some significant playing time, and he's a guy we really haven't seen much of at all. And given our serious woes at the tackle position, hopefully, maybe we get pleasantly surprised by some Chris Paul play. I mean, he's going up against some solid defenders on that D line there for the Cowboys. So it also could be a complete massacre. We'll see. I think you see some of those younger tight ends get some time. I know you mentioned earlier in the pod, Tom, you've been very disappointed with the play out of the the TE room this year, which I totally agree with. We'll talk more. I'm sure we'll talk more about what that room is going to look like moving forward. Once we get into some off-season episodes, but I think you see a lot of Cole Turner. If Armani Rogers is healthy, you see him. And I actually think Curtis Hodges is a guy that we talked a little bit about early in the season who went on IR very early. He actually just got taken off. So I actually think that's an indication that he's going to play, a good bit in this next game for us as well. I think you see, more guys on that O-line, on that depth of that O-line getting time. I think you probably see Sadiq Charles in there if he's healthy. Christian Holmes and Percy Butler definitely going to be starting on the back end as well, if I had to guess. Just given them being rookies, as well as just some of the injuries we've been had in St. Juice, Cam Curl, other guys, kind of some other guys back there as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the game. I think there's a lot we can learn from it. But I also don't think maybe some of our guys that we would be counting on playing in this game if it was meaningful are going to be in there. I think you see a lot of guys getting added to that, injury report, this week that maybe we're just kind of dealing with playable, injuries, right? But they're kind of thinking to themselves, hey, why kind of risk it and also give some of these younger guys a chance to play? I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think about this game? Who are you excited to see? What are you thinking about?
Well, I personally am certainly excited to see Sam Howell. I think that this is going to be kind of a make or break game for him in a weird way. I mean, if he plays exceptionally well, maybe he's making a case for starting out the year next year, especially if we don't make any moves at the quarterback position, really. Maybe we draft a guy in and he and Sam have it out a little bit when Sir Heineke ends up helping them learn the playbook a little bit more. One of the things that I am excited for, and a name that I'm sure Clark is definitely going to be watching for, because I do believe he could be our number one receiver this week, is Cam Sims might be our number one this week. And I know that for many Commanders fans out there, Cam Sims is the number one receiver in our hearts. This time he'll be the number one receiver on the field. Chris, I love this shout out to Curtis Hodges. He's a guy that I'm a big fan of, mainly because he is a Sun Devil himself, an ASU alumni, but also because he's a guy that kind of is, one of those more athletic tight ends who's going to run the ball or run with the ball a little bit more smoothly than like one of those transition guys, like, I don't know, say Logan Thomas. Chris Paul, I'm happy to see him out there. I think that this might be the hardest starting, like, first game for any
Right.
quarterback of all time, especially when you have guys like Micah Parsons chasing you, and you have DeMarcus Lawrence on the other edge coming after you. You have to throw the ball against Trayvon Diggs. So it's going to be a tough game for these young guys. And let me tell you what, if they pull a win out here, I think we might go buck wild as soon as they win. I told Clark if we get a 3 touchdown lead on them, I'll streak. Uh, Purely because I don't think we'll ever have another 3 touchdown lead against the Cowboys with a rookie QB ever again.
It'll be the new
At
logo
least
for this podcast.
absolutely.
Yeah, let's hope they don't get 3 touchdowns up.
Let's hope they don't get 3 touchdowns up for my arrest record, but well, we'll see what happens. Now that being said, I think that this is definitely a tough game. I think it's one where, the beer vendors aren't going to have a tough time selling. I think a lot of people are going to be drinking their sorrows away, especially uh, if you're a Commanders fan. If you're a Cowboys fan, you're drinking to celebrate the first seed possibly. So, I think this is a very tough game. I'm excited to see the guys make their impact as they may, and I'm hoping for a win, but I'm expecting a loss.
How many paper bags do you think we're gonna see at this game? Paper bags on heads.
At least 10. At least 10.
Oh, probably more. I've actually worn a paper bag to a game before in some of our seasons past. Understandably so. But I actually heard that some fans were putting on paper bags earlier a couple games ago. I think maybe I can't remember which game it was, but they were actually like asked to, by staff to take them off, some BS like hazard reason or whatever. But curious if that creates any problems, or if they try to enforce that if a bunch of fans are. I hope not, because they deserve this. That's what Snyder deserves to see. Is he looks out over the crowd and sees all the fans wearing paper bags over their heads because they're so disgusted and embarrassed to even be at a game, but yet they continue to go because they're fans.
Yeah, I think the crowd, we're all going to be in agreement of, where things stand for this game. Obviously, it doesn't matter. I think we're going to have some very fun chants. I maybe Tom and I'll even start a few. It's going to be pretty anti-Snyder and anti-team, unfortunately, but just the way that that last loss is just going to sit in the mouths of all of our fan base. It's just really left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. How this season kind of played out. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that Sam Howell, looks good, but like you mentioned, Tom, it's not a great matchup for him to be going into. But when we saw him in the preseason, he kind of had a little bit of an X factor. He can move pretty well. He's got a decent arm. He seems like a guy that might be able to make plays. That a certain quarterback that started last week, definitely wouldn't be able to do. So I'm excited for this game, but I'm hoping that something can cleanse my palate from this game after witnessing that last Browns game.
Yeah, sadly that game is one that Browns game is going to be one we're thinking about for a long time, because there's just that game is such a big what if, when it comes to the decision making about who's going to start that game, right? So that's going to be a tough one for us to get over, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I totally agree. I want to look at this last game positively. I think there's a lot of evaluation to be done here. Um, and I don't think we'll see a lot of our normal guys in. So I'm always interested to kind of evaluate depth, look at maybe there's some diamonds in the rough on this roster we're not taking advantage of enough. That always happens. Saw it, this year. One good example in Derek Forrest, a guy that we really didn't thought was probably primarily just a special teams depth guy, and here he is. Really had a breakout season for him here. So, maybe we find another Derek Forrest on Sunday.
Well, I'll tell you what, I will be looking for Milo Eifler to really have a breakout game. And I truly think Cameron Cheeseman deserves to get some snaps at the linebacker position, if he so chooses to go out on the field.
Can't be much
But
worse than what we got there now.
quite honestly, that is the truth. David Mayo is much um, less exciting to me than Cameron. Now, if nothing else, than to see the stat line of Cheeseman making a tackle. Um, but I'll tell you what, I want to predict the star of the game before it even happens, and my prediction for the star of the game for the Commanders is going to be Tress Way. Now I think Cavante
Oh no.
Turpin. I think Cavante Turpin has a chance to ruin that prediction, especially given the electricity in his legs and the return game that the Cowboys have kind of had all year. But it'll certainly be an interesting game. I agree with you, Chris. I think it's a really important that we do evaluate our depth here and kind of figure out what guys we want to keep. We do have a decent amount of expiring contracts that
Mhm.
have to be reevaluated, especially considering that this is a game where we will be, rotating in so many of those guys and kind of giving them their last chance at really proving something. Now at the same time, I think Ron Rivera and this coaching staff isn't going to give us the best chance to succeed. And I think that we've seen that all season, except for maybe the first few Heineke games. But otherwise, not high expectations for the team here, but definitely hoping to see some advancement.
Yeah, David Bott a sack or two here would be a nice kind of way to cap off the season.
The Bada brothers should be in full effect of David Bada and F.A.O. Bada, but we will see. It's always hard to predict with these guys because we might see frickin' Terry McLaurin out there trying out safety if Jack Del Rio really just
Please no.
doesn't give enough of a shit about his job. But
If
we'll
I can
see.
just get one highlight of Cam Sims catching a ball against Trayvon Diggs, it'll be all worth it.
Cam Sims tutty would be amazing.
That's all I
Ca-
need. All I need is one image of Cam Sims pulling down a catch with Trayvon Diggs within 5 feet of him, and I will be happy that
I mean,
for this game.
I hate to say it, is Cam Sims playing for a job here?
I think he already has the job, in my opinion. But I will say this: this is his designated week to be with his son Trayvon Diggs, and I think they're gonna have a lot of fun together. Now, as everyone knows, the dad never lets the son win unless he's a bad, he's not competitive. And I can tell you what, Cam Sims is pretty dang competitive. So I fully expect to see at least 3 Mosses from Cam Sims over Trayvon Diggs. I think Sam Howell is a guy that is really playing for a job here, and he has to take a few shots. So it'll be interesting to see. It will definitely be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would imagine that Cam Sims has probably been a primary receiver for Sam Howell in practice, running on the same teams and stuff like that. So yeah, that a David Botta sack fest and a Cam Sims touchdown is what I'm hoping for this Sunday.
One last small interesting note for betters. If for those who are unaware, De'Ami Brown, a receiver for the Commanders, who we've had for a long time, really doesn't play much. If he gets in this game, I might be hitting the over on yards because Sam Howell has really shown, or he did show in preseason, a real big reliance on his former UNC teammate. So I think if you somehow find someone who gives you an over on De'Ami Brown that's profitable, I think you hit that bet. I think you hammer that thing, quite honestly. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap it up. For my co-hosts, Chris and Clark, my name is Tom, and this has been the Going Commando podcast. And as always, HTTR and HTTC.
And prayers up for Damar Hamlin. We wish him a speedy recovery.